It all began innocuously, with a small family gathering at Grandpa's house. My grandfather, a man who had lived through decades of highs and lows, had a peculiar way of interacting with everyone. He was always thoughtful, but there was a hidden undercurrent to his actions that, at the time, seemed insignificant. Grandpa, in his late 70s, had already lost his wife, my grandmother, years ago. Despite the pain that came with that loss, he had a habit of doing strange little things, like gifting me odd trinkets or giving playful advice. On this particular day, he handed me a wooden stick, carved with intricate designs. It was a gift he said he had made during his younger years, a symbol of strength and resilience. He told me that it would bring me luck, though I never truly understood why a stick of all things would have such meaning. With a smile, I took the gift, half amused and half confused by his gesture. What I didn't realize then was that this moment, so seemingly simple, was the beginning of a much deeper and darker story about infidelity, secrets, and emotions that would unravel in ways I couldn't anticipate. I was in my early 20s, caught up in the whirlwind of a new relationship. Thomas, a charming and seemingly devoted man, was my first serious boyfriend. We had known each other since high school, and our bond seemed unbreakable. But beneath the surface, our relationship was complicated. I was emotionally attached in ways I hadn't recognized, and Thomas, while loving, had his own issues with commitment and transparency. One weekend, after a long week of work and stress, we visited Grandpa together. The weather was warm, and the house was filled with the smells of my grandmother's old recipes, though she had passed long ago. Grandpa's house had an old-world charm, full of stories and memories. As we all sat around, enjoying the evening, Thomas and Grandpa got into a discussion about the family's history, specifically about my grandmother. It was a topic that always seemed to stir up complex feelings for Grandpa, and on this occasion it was no different. The conversation drifted into unspoken territory. Grandpa, with a soft sigh, mentioned something about the love he had for my grandmother and how, despite everything, he had kept a secret from her. At first I assumed he was talking about the secrets of the past, things that we all keep hidden. But as I pressed him for more, he revealed a truth that shattered my sense of what I thought I knew about relationships. Grandpa admitted, through the course of a long and painful conversation, that during the early years of his marriage to my grandmother, he had cheated on her. The affair, which lasted for several months, involved a woman he met during a trip abroad. The emotional attachment was deep, but it was also fleeting, as he returned to his wife, promising himself that he would never let it happen again. I was stunned. Grandpa, the man I had always admired for his wisdom, had been unfaithful. My first instinct was to reject what he had done, but as he spoke, I began to understand the emotional complexity of it all. He hadn't set out to hurt my grandmother. He had been trapped in his own emotional turmoil, facing loneliness, unmet needs, and a deep, gnawing sense of longing for something outside of his predictable life. The affair, although painful and ultimately regrettable, was a desperate attempt to feel truly alive. But what struck me the most was the weight of his confession, the guilt, the regret, and the emotional toll it had taken on him for decades. Grandpa, despite his seeming composure, had lived with this burden for so long. The weight of infidelity wasn't just in the act itself, but in the emotional landscape that came with it: the secrecy, the guilt, the shattered trust, and the fear of being exposed. As the years passed, my relationship with Thomas began to mirror, in unexpected ways, the very dynamics Grandpa had described. At first, it was small things. Thomas would say he was going out with friends, but I would feel an unsettling sense of doubt creeping in. The little white lies he told became harder to ignore. I had grown emotionally attached to him, but I also feared that something was missing in our relationship. One evening, I discovered the truth: Thomas had been seeing someone else. It wasn't the physical aspect of the affair that hurt the most, it was the emotional betrayal. The idea that someone could be emotionally connected to someone other than me, that the intimacy I thought we shared was now divided, left me in a state of disbelief. I confronted him, my heart in my throat, and the conversation that followed was raw, painful, and incredibly complicated. Thomas explained that his attachment to me had been real, but his needs, his emotional desires had led him astray. He had been searching for something, some connection that was lacking in our relationship, though it was hard for him to articulate that at the time. Like Grandpa, Thomas had a deep internal conflict. His guilt was evident, but so was the emotional attachment to the other woman. And like Grandpa, he regretted his actions, but the damage had already been done. The affair had created a rift in our relationship that we couldn't easily repair. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. In both Grandpa's story and my own, the emotions tied to infidelity were much more complicated than just acts of betrayal. For Grandpa, the affair was a consequence of unmet emotional needs that he failed to address in a healthy way. For me, it was the result of a relationship that had become emotionally strained, with a partner who struggled to communicate his feelings. Infidelity, in both cases, wasn't about a lack of love. It was about a failure to truly connect, to communicate openly, and to understand the deep emotional currents running beneath the surface. Both Grandpa and I had learned that emotional attachment wasn't just about being physically present, it was about being emotionally available, honest, and vulnerable with the ones we loved. Ultimately, my relationship with Thomas ended. The emotional scars from the betrayal didn't heal overnight, but I came to understand that emotional attachment was not a one-way street. It required effort, openness, and a willingness to face the difficult truths that arise in any deep connection. Just as Grandpa had to reckon with the past, I too had to confront my own emotional complexities and move forward, wiser and more aware of what I truly needed in relationships.